Out there? Yes, clear. Loud and clear. Pacific. 4423 live. We'll get the mobile station.
On the intercom. C7?
Yes, ma'am. We'll be clear, and 233 will be clear on the end for E. Edward, and so we both be efficient.
My name is Daniel Hayes. Minneapolis has always been a city of contrasts. Steel towers rising beside frozen lakes, rush hour traffic crawling past quiet neighborhoods, the hum of modern life stitched into a landscape carved by the Mississippi River. I worked in a medical supply warehouse near the University District. Nothing glamorous, but it felt steady, safe. In the Midwest, we always believed chaos belonged elsewhere, on the coasts, in distant wars, not here in the heart of Minnesota. September 14th, 7:46 a.m. The first bite of autumn had already settled in. The air carried that sharp chill that stings your lungs, the kind that promises winter is only weeks away. I remember standing outside with a paper cup of coffee, watching my breath fog in the air, when the sirens cut through the city. Not the test tones we all ignore once a month. This was different. Longer, sharper, layered over with the emergency alert system blaring from every phone in sight. Immediate threat detected. Shelter in place. This is not a test. At first, no one believed it. Minneapolis? A target? People laughed nervously, shaking their heads, scrolling their phones for clarity. But the details came fast. Government radio channels confirmed what satellites had seen. Multiple launches over the Arctic, trajectories pointing south. Words like strategic corridor and high-value infrastructure spilled from trembling voices. I looked down Washington Avenue, usually clogged with buses and commuters. Instead, cars screeched through red lights, colliding in frantic escape attempts. Students bolted from campus buildings. A man abandoned his delivery truck in the middle of the street and ran, clutching only his phone. The air smelled of burned rubber and panic. We all wondered the same thing. Why Minneapolis? But the answer was clear the moment someone said it aloud. The river. The Mississippi wasn't just water. It was a highway for grain, steel, oil, the lifeline of the interior. And the city around it wasn't just another Midwestern skyline. It was a hub. Cut Minneapolis, and you cut deep into the arteries of America. By 8 a.m., downtown's glass towers reflected a chaos unlike anything I had ever seen. Sirens wailed, helicopters thundered overhead, and the steady order of the Midwest unraveled into something primal. People screamed into phones that no longer connected. Banks and office towers emptied like sinking ships. I kept thinking of my younger sister, Emily. She lived across the river in a small apartment, still asleep when I had left for work. Did she even hear the sirens? Did she know what was happening? My hands shook as I dialed her number again and again, only to hear silence. By 8:15, the grid began to flicker. Lights dimming, street signals failing. The city grew darker, colder, as though the world itself had pulled a curtain across Minneapolis. That was when it hit me. Harder than the sirens. Harder than the alerts. We weren't bystanders. We weren't some flyover state watching from a distance. We were on the front line. Beneath the bustling streets of Minneapolis lies a forgotten underworld. Long before the city grew into glass towers and sprawling freeways, workers had carved limestone tunnels near the banks of the Mississippi. They were used for storage, for milling, even for hiding contraband during Prohibition. For decades, they sat abandoned, silent chambers swallowed by darkness and time. But on this day, the tunnels became something else, a sanctuary. As the strange haze above the city thickened, word spread quickly through neighborhoods. Head to the river. There are places underground. People didn't need official orders. Instinct drove them there. Families gathered what they could carry: blankets, bottles of water, a few cans of food, and moved as if guided by some unspoken urgency. The entrances were scattered and discreet. Half-hidden stairwells near the riverfront, old maintenance hatches, forgotten access points in the shadow of the mills. One by one, people slipped below ground. The city's familiar noise faded with every step, replaced by the hollow echo of footsteps on damp stone. The air was heavy with the smell of earth and rust, colder than the surface, and thick with the weight of silence. Inside, groups formed quickly. Strangers became companions, sharing what little they had. A mother lit a candle, shielding the flame with her hand so her children wouldn't be afraid of the shadows stretching along the curved walls. An older man carried a battery-powered radio, its static-filled voice breaking through the darkness with fragments of terrifying news. Unidentified aircraft, sudden blackouts. The Midwest placed on military alert. The updates came in bursts, always incomplete, always leaving more questions than answers. Deeper in the tunnels, the ground trembled faintly. It wasn't the movement of trains or construction. It was something heavier, something that seemed to ripple through the very bones of the city. People froze when the vibrations came, eyes darting to the ceiling as dust drifted down. And all the while, just beyond the walls, the Mississippi kept flowing. Its current pounded against the stone banks, muffled but constant. A reminder that above them, the city was still standing, though for how long, no one could say. No one knew how many had descended below. Dozens? Hundreds? Perhaps more. But they all shared the same thought. Minneapolis was no longer safe on the surface. Whatever was coming, whatever had already begun, survival now depended on the forgotten veins of limestone and water beneath the city.
What you out there? Yes, clear. Loud and clear. Pacific.
2423 live, look at the mobile station.
On the intercom. C7?
Yes, ma'am, we'll be clear, and 233 will be clear on the end for E. Edward, and so we both be assisting.
Minneapolis had never sounded so empty. By late afternoon, the usual rhythm of the city had vanished. Nicolay Mall, once crowded with office workers and the steady hum of buses, lay abandoned. Storefronts were shuttered, traffic lights blinked pointlessly over deserted intersections, and only the faint rustle of leaves carried across the streets. The silence was heavy, almost unnatural, broken only by the distant roar of engines overhead. Military aircraft circled the skies like dark silhouettes against the fading light. Their thunder shook windows in Uptown and sent tremors rippling through the neighborhoods near the river. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed once, then died out, leaving behind an echo that seemed to hang in the air. The Mississippi, usually alive with boat horns and laughter from riverfront trails, flowed in solitude. Only the bridges stood watch, their concrete and steel frames looming over a city in retreat. Beneath them, the tunnels were filling with those who had chosen to hide. But above ground, Minneapolis felt like a ghost town. Not everyone had made it underground. On Hennepin Avenue, a man stood frozen in place, staring up at the sky. His car door was left open, engine idling, headlights cutting across an empty street. He listened to the sound of jets rolling across the clouds, and for a moment, he whispered as if to himself, "So this is it." Then he turned and walked quickly toward the river, disappearing into the shadows. Radio towers crackled with fragmented transmissions, orders, warnings, desperate voices calling for confirmation. Few could make sense of it. Some said the strikes had already begun on the coasts. Others insisted the Midwest still had hours, maybe less. The countdown was invisible, but everyone could feel it pressing closer with each passing minute. Downtown, skyscrapers stood like hollow monuments, their glass reflecting the last light of the sun. In one of the tallest towers, a red beacon pulsed on the roof, blinking steadily into the darkening sky. It was a signal, a warning, and a reminder that the city was still alive. But barely. As night crept over Minneapolis, the silence grew heavier. The people who remained on the surface moved like shadows, slipping into alleys, basements, or the tunnels below. Overhead, the aircraft still roared, circling, waiting, and beneath it all, the city held its breath, knowing the next sound might be the last. Underground, time seemed to stop. The tunnels near the Mississippi had become a labyrinth of fear and whispers. Hundreds of people now crowded inside, pressed shoulder to shoulder in the damp air. Some sat on cold stone floors, others leaned against rusted support beams, their faces dimly lit by the glow of flashlights and flickering candles. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth, sweat, and the faint trace of smoke seeping from somewhere above. Every few minutes, the ground trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling, settling on blankets and the thin layers of food people had managed to bring. With each vibration, conversations halted. Parents pressed children against their chests, shushing them quietly, while the older ones stared at the stone walls as though they could feel the war inching closer. Radios became the only lifeline. Static hissed between broken transmissions, a voice occasionally breaking through with chilling fragments. Strike confirmed, Midwest at risk. Stay underground if you can. The words were incomplete, but enough to remind everyone of what waited above. Some tried to create order in the chaos. A retired nurse moved between groups, checking on the elderly and those who had collapsed in panic. A young man handed out bottled water, one sip at a time, carefully rationed. Others simply sat in silence, staring at nothing, as though bracing themselves for whatever came next. In one corner, a boy clutched a notebook, scribbling shapes in the dim light. When asked what he was drawing, he whispered, "The city, before it goes away." His words echoed in the chamber like a prophecy, The sounds from the surface grew louder. Distant explosions rolled through the stone like thunder, followed by the muffled wail of collapsing structures. Somewhere far above, sirens screamed briefly, then cut off in an instant. Each noise sent waves of dread through the tunnels, as if the city itself were crying out. And yet, amid the fear, there was still a fragile sense of unity. People held hands in the darkness, strangers leaning on strangers. No one knew how long the tunnels would hold, or if the river above would remain steady. But in that moment, deep beneath Minneapolis, they shared the same hope. That when the fire passed, some part of their city and their lives might still remain. The sound came first. Not an explosion, not a roar, something deeper. A low, rolling hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, but in seconds it filled every corner of the tunnel. The walls vibrated beneath us, candles flickered, throwing shadows that danced like ghosts. People froze. I felt my breath catch. Around me, the murmurs stopped. A woman clutched her child so tightly her knuckles went white. Somewhere deeper in the bunker, a man began to pray. The silence before the impact was worse than the noise. It was the pause before the end. Then the ground shuddered violently. Concrete above us groaned and cracked. Dust rained down. Somewhere in the distance, a deep metallic scream cut through the air, and the tunnel lights dimmed, flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed us. In the pitch black, I could hear breathing, quiet sobs, the shuffle of bodies pressing closer together. My own heart was pounding loud enough to drown out everything else. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, knees drawn up, and felt the weight of the moment sink into my chest. Above us, Minneapolis screamed. Or at least I imagined it did. The sound was not something human, more a deep vibration, a force that seemed to rend the air itself. Then came a distant flash, not a light, but a living thing, white, blinding, burning. I couldn't look directly at it, but I knew it had reached us. For a moment, the world stopped. There was no time, no sound, only the pounding of my own heart and the steady hum in the stone beneath us. I thought of the city above, the river, the bridges, the skyline I knew so well. Gone, reduced to ash in a single breath. A shudder rolled through the tunnel again. Dust filled my throat. I coughed. Around me, someone whimpered. Another whispered a name I couldn't speak. I pressed my hands over my face, trying to block the noise, trying to hold on to something before it all ended. And then I felt it. The last light. Not above the ground, but inside me. A trembling, fragile ember that said even here, in the heart of the darkness, we still existed. Until we didn't. 24 hours had passed since the city fell silent. We emerged slowly from the tunnels, guided by instinct and the trembling memory of what had happened. The stairwell opened onto a world changed beyond recognition. The air was thick, metallic, and warm, a suffocating veil that clung to skin and lungs. Dust rose in slow clouds with every step. Above us, the sky was a strange, glowing shade of orange, like fire locked behind a haze. The streets were unrecognizable. Minneapolis was gone. The skyline I had known was reduced to twisted steel and scorched stone. Bridges hung broken over a dark river that seemed to drink the city whole. Fires still burned in pockets, sending columns of smoke curling into the sky, carrying ash and the scent of something deeply wrong. Silence dominated the city now. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of an erased world. No traffic, no sirens, no voices, only the sound of our own breathing, and somewhere in the distance, a low, constant groan of the earth. We moved cautiously, stepping over rubble, over bodies, over remnants of a life that now belonged to memory. The few who had survived moved in small groups, scanning the horizon, eyes wide and haunted. Faces were coated in ash, lips cracked from dust, skin pale from shock. Some whispered names they would never hear answered. Others stared forward as if they were already ghosts. I carried nothing but my jacket and a small pack. My hands still shook. Beneath it all was a strange numbness, like the world had been reset, and we were the first to wake in a place that no longer existed. From the distance came an unfamiliar sound, a steady hum, low and mechanical. Some said it was the river, others whispered of machines still running underground. Nobody knew for certain. We found what remained of a small plaza, its benches twisted, glass shattered. A lone figure sat against a wall, staring at the sky, face streaked with soot. Around them, silence was not empty. It was full of questions, of grief, and of fear. I looked at my hands. They were stained with ash. Somewhere deep inside, I felt a seed of something strange, a fragile, burning certainty. We had survived, but survival was only the beginning. Minneapolis was gone, and so was the world we had known. By the second day, movement became a fragile necessity. Soldiers emerged from the ash, their faces shadowed beneath helmets still streaked with soot. They moved in disciplined lines, rifles slung but ready. Their boots crunched over broken glass and scorched pavement. They called survivors forward, their voices calm but firm, guiding them toward points marked by makeshift flags and faint lights, safe zones in a city that no longer had safety. We followed them through streets that were unrecognizable. Where there had once been shops and cafes, there were skeletal remains of buildings. Where laughter had echoed, there was only the hush of wind through wreckage. Each step felt heavy, not just physically, but with the weight of what had been lost. At one of these gathering points, an open square now serving as a triage area, survivors huddled under tarps and tents. Medics moved between them, checking wounds, offering water, murmuring reassurances that sounded hollow, but were all they had. Soldiers stood guard, eyes scanning the horizon. The air was tense, thick with ash and unspoken questions. Some survivors wept quietly. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at the ground. A child clung to an older man's hand, her small fingers trembling. Above us, the orange sky seemed eternal, like the city had been set alight and the fire refused to die. Then a voice came over a battered loudspeaker. Static first, then the unmistakable tone of authority. The president's voice, steady and measured, cut through the air. My fellow Americans, today we stand in the shadow of destruction. Our cities have been struck, lives have been lost, but America is not broken. It is awakened. To those who brought this upon us, know this. We will respond. We will retaliate. We will not falter. His words rolled over the square, heavy with promise. Survivors paused, heads lifting, soldiers straightened. Somewhere, a woman whispered the word vengeance. The president continued, "To those who remain, watching, waiting, our nation will rise from these ashes. We will hunt those responsible. We will deliver justice, and we will ensure that no force on this earth will ever threaten our people again. America will endure." The broadcast ended. Silence returned, but it was different now. Charged, as if the words themselves had ignited something inside the survivors. A slow murmur rose, a mix of fear, grief, and determination. Somewhere ahead, a soldier turned to the group. "Move out," he said. And we did, toward the unknown, toward survival, toward a new dawn. The air had changed. Not just the scent of ash or the weight of dust, but something deeper, something that clung to the bones. It was the quiet after a storm so vast it had rewritten reality. Minneapolis was gone, but the people who remained carried a new kind of life. Fragile, uncertain, but alive. We followed the soldiers for hours, moving through streets that seemed frozen in time. Every step was a reminder of what had been lost. Buildings stood as blackened skeletons, their windows staring like empty eyes. Bridges sagged over a silent river. Somewhere far away, a bell tolled once, long and mournful. At the safe zone, tents had multiplied overnight. Survivors clustered around fires. Medics moved with tireless care. Children played quietly in the shadows, their laughter fragile as glass. Soldiers patrolled, scanning the horizon, but there was a change in their demeanor. Less command, more resolve. I found myself at the edge of the square, watching the gathering. I thought of everything that had been taken. The skyline, the streets, the comfort of the ordinary. And yet, beneath it all, there was something that survived, a stubborn ember of humanity. The president's words from the day before echoed in my mind. America will endure. At first, I had doubted them. Now, standing among the survivors, I felt their weight. Not as a promise of vengeance, but as a vow of survival. A soldier approached and nodded to me. "We keep moving forward," he said quietly. I nodded in return. There was no other choice. Somewhere in the chaos, a woman sang softly. Not a hymn, not a chant, just a melody. It was broken, incomplete, but it carried through the air like a prayer. I closed my eyes and let it fill me. For the first time since the blast, I breathed without fear. My heart still ached, but there was something in that ache, a hope that we could rebuild, that we could find each other again, that we could make something whole out of what remained. I looked to the soldiers guiding us and saw it reflected in their eyes. Determination. I looked at the survivors and saw it too, quiet, fragile, but unyielding. Minneapolis was gone. But we were here, still breathing, still searching, still human. And in that truth, I found my answer. We would rise, we would endure, and the story of what we had lost would be the story of what we chose to save. The sun was beginning to break through the ash, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed in the dawn.